right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second module. We're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today for our second training in our FIPSA Financial Grants Management Training Series. Today's training topic is roles and responsibilities of pass-through entities and sub-grantees. And then hear a welcome message from FIPSA Director Shondell Dawson.
Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today. I am Shondell Dawson, Director of the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act program, located in Washington, D.C. on the land of the Anacostans. I want to extend a welcome to all who have joined us because I am so very grateful that you accepted our invitation and will be taking part in these vitally important financial grants management training series. The FIPSA program has partnered with Director Janice Caldwell and her team in the Office of Grants Management to provide a three-part financial grants management training series to help all grantees and sub-grantees learn more about the policies, regulations, and best practices for administering federal grants that you receive from the Department of Health and Human Services. For 38 years, FIPSA-funded states and territories have provided sub-grants to local domestic violence programs, culture-specific organizations, and tribes. In 2021, the Historic American Rescue Plan supplemental funding provided resources for states and territories to issue sub-grants to rape crisis centers and sexual assault programs for the very first time. The Historic American Rescue Plan funding also provided resources for culture-specific domestic violence and sexual assault organizations to receive FIPSA funding. The FIPSA program is pleased to welcome sexual assault programs and culture-specific organizations, as well as domestic violence programs as subrecipients. Pass-through entities and subrecipients play a vital role in providing safety, services, and support for survivors in your communities every day. The hotlines, the services, the supportive resources that you provide families help them access the help that they've been seeking as they're surviving trauma, violence, and abuse. And the financial infrastructure and best practices for managing your FIPSA grants serve as foundational frameworks that enable you all to do great things on behalf of survivors. The FIPSA program and the Office of Grants Management are equally committed to ensuring that you all are aware of the resources and have the opportunity to learn more about the important financial controls that each agency should have in place as federal grant recipients. Your work is so very important to FIPSA and to survivors all across the country. And we want to make sure that you all have the tools, knowledge, and resources you need to continue to do great things every day. I hope that you find this training worthwhile, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, and welcome to Roles and Responsibilities of Pass-Through Entities and Sub-grantees, the second in a series of trainings designed to support FIPSA grantees to effectively manage their federal awards and support survivors to the fullest extent that these funding opportunities allow. My name is Courtney Fisher, and I'm a contract grants management subject matter expert with FIPSA, and my pronouns are she and her. I am coming to you today from Washington, D.C., from Anacostan and Piscataway lands. I'll be delivering the training today. I have decades of experience working in the role of a pass-through entity and a sub-grantee. I understand many of the challenges you may be experiencing and probably have had many of the same questions you're asking yourself right now about how to best manage these funds. Throughout the training, I'll provide pro tips for your consideration, which are informed by my years of practice, and I encourage you to share your own pro tips in the chat as well so that we can learn from each other. I'm also joined today by my colleagues Laura Kovach and Suzanne Marcus, along with other FIPSA and grants management staff who will answer your questions in the Q&A, and who you can reach out to for additional information when this webinar is over. Let's get started. With the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, ARP, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, FIPSA, has received an historic investment of funds that allows FIPSA grantees to expand their scope and reach in new and innovative ways to address the COVID-19 related needs of sexual assault and domestic violence survivors. And along with this comes increased responsibilities for FIPSA grantees, including those who may be managing multiple FIPSA funding streams, including their existing core FIPSA funding, serving as pass-through entities, perhaps for the first time, and for many sexual assault programs and culturally specific programs, receiving FIPSA funds for the first time as well. Regardless of the role that you play, everyone is doing difficult work now more than ever. This training series is designed to educate FIPSA grantees, including pass-through entities and sub-recipients, about the roles and responsibilities that come with managing and administering FIPSA funds and the resources and technical assistance available to you. Now I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Laura Kovach, who will provide us with webinar guidance and kick us off with a few polls. Suzanne will take us through knowledge checks throughout the trainings where we have the opportunity to apply what we discussed.
You're on mute. Laura, you're on mute.
That should have happened in the first module. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Kovach, and I'm the Executive Special Projects Coordinator and Contractor with FIPSA. And it's great to be with you today. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you from Fairfax, Virginia on Powhatan tribal lands. Closed captioning will be available during this training. To access closed captioning, click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and then click to show subtitles. We will record the webinar and post to our brand new ARP FIPSA webpage within 2 weeks of this event, along with a Spanish version. Any resource or link we provide you in the chat during training today will also be emailed out to everyone, and we will send out the slides following this training. For those who may be dealing with some unstable internet, try dialing the number located in your webinar invitation for higher quality. Due to the large number of participants, you will be in listen-only mode. We will provide other opportunities to engage throughout our time together. We will use the Q&A function for any questions that you have during the training. If there are questions that we don't get to, we will include answers and responses in an FAQ that we will provide following this training. Throughout the training, we will provide knowledge checks using the chat where you can share your thoughts, and other times we will be using Zoom polling. So I know some folks have already started to share in the chat where they're joining us from. So if you haven't had an opportunity or you want to share again, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And if you know the ancestral Native American homelands that you reside on, please share those as well. We are seeing folks from all over the country. This is so great. Tribes. Welcome, welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you today. Okay. Let's take a moment to see who's with us today. In this work, often titles don't reflect the full range of responsibilities you take on, but please select what best describes your role. I'm going to launch the poll right now. So what is your role? Okay, another couple seconds. Okay. All right. So looks like we have lots of financial officers, FIPSA state administrators and grant managers, program directors, executive directors, tribal and sexual assault program representatives. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. A really diverse range of folks today. Then the next poll question, what type of organization are you representing? What type of organization are you representing? And you get to pick, you have a few options here. You can pick because we all work for different organizations. Okay, I'm going to share the results. So state DV or SA coalitions, domestic violence programs, we've got 47%, or we've got 47 dual DV SA programs, tribal organizations. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. So this is an opportunity to share in the chat. While it's exciting to have this new funding and with that new opportunities to support staff and survivors who have been impacted in so many ways by the pandemic, we know this funding can also come with challenges, particularly around the financial aspects of managing these funds. Our goal is to partner with you to help you address these challenges through responsive training and technical assistance. Please share your concerns or challenges in the chat with administering ARP FIPSA funds so that we can ensure our trainings and materials are addressing your needs. So go ahead and take a few minutes and share some thoughts in the chat. What challenges or concerns do you have as a subrecipient or a pass-through entity? What challenges or concerns as you are starting to spend down your FIPSA funds? What are some things that are coming up for you? Complicated allocation of staff time across funding sources, allowable costs, cost allocation, data reporting requirements. What types of things need to be reported for FIPSA from sexual assault agencies? Allowable costs. So I'm seeing some things that were shared during module 1, but also some themes here that cut across lots of different folks. Okay. We will be able to take everything that's in the chat and document all of your feedback, as this also helps inform our ability to provide training and technical assistance. Please feel free to keep sharing in the chat as we move forward. The goal of this training is to provide you with an overview of your roles and your responsibilities as a pass-through grantee and as a sub-grantee of pass-through funds. This training uses the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, as our foundation, which is where all the roles of executive departments and agencies of the federal government can be found. In particular, we are using Title 45 of the CFR, Part 75, which covers the administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. Title 45 applies to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is where FIPSA is housed. However, this training builds on this foundation to discuss best practices in the management of your award. The CFR is often the minimum requirement for pass-through entities and sub-grantees. We are also going to discuss best practices in the management of your award. After completing this training module, you will be able to understand the financial and performance monitoring requirements for pass-through entities and sub-grantees, be able to identify the standards and best practices for financial management, including the management of multiple grant streams and the process of drawing down funds, identify strategies that pass-through entities can use to build the capacity of subrecipients to effectively manage their FIPSA funds, and describe ACF's expectations for drawing down FIPSA grant funds and the available training and resources to help subgrantees navigate the drawdown process. We'll begin by talking through an overview of your FIPSA award, including defining some terms that will become important to you as you navigate this new funding. Next, we'll discuss the requirements, responsibilities, and best practices for pass-through entities, including ensuring that there is compliance with parts of the CFR that were discussed in training module 1. how to submit your required federal reports, and how to monitor sub-grantees. We'll then talk about the requirements and best practices of sub-grantees. This section will discuss the importance of coordination between fiscal and program staff, the sub-grantees' duty to inform and communicate with pass-through entities, records retention, and best practices in documenting your work and time. Finally, we will discuss audits. What are the requirements for audits and what are the best practices for audits? You will have an opportunity to apply what we're discussing throughout this training with knowledge checks and review of a case study that highlights a typical scenario a FIPSA ARP grantee may find themselves in. Lastly, we'll share resources and other tools FIPSA grantees can refer to when questions about your grant come up. Many of these acronyms relate to aspects of administering your FIPSA grant. The use of acronyms, particularly for those new to federal grants, can get a little overwhelming. In this training, we will spell out all acronyms, and this list is to help you decode the alphabet soup. And if you're working with sexual assault programs for the first time, please take a look at some of the acronyms that are commonly used within the sexual assault field that's in the lower right-hand corner of this chart. Now I'll hand it back over to Courtney to kick off this training with an overview of your FIPSA award.
Thank you, Laura. Let's begin with an overview of your FIPSA award and notice of award. FIPSA requires that states, territories, and tribes identify and provide subawards to eligible entities for programs and projects within the state that are designed to prevent incidents of family violence, domestic violence, and dating violence by providing immediate shelter and supportive services. Grant use may include paying for the operating and administrative expenses of the facilities for a shelter for adult and youth victims of family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence, and their dependents. And FIPSA funding may be used to provide prevention services to prevent future incidents of family violence, domestic violence, and dating violence. Please refer to your ARP guidance memos for details on how your FIPSA ARP funding streams may expand the services to include sexual assault and culturally specific survivor services. FIPSA funds that are awarded to subrecipients may be used for the following services to victims of family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence, and their dependents. The provision of immediate shelter and related supportive services to adult and youth victims of family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence, and their dependents on a regular basis, including paying for the operating and administrative expenses of the facilities for such shelter. Assistance in developing safety plans and supporting efforts of victims of family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence to make decisions related to their ongoing safety and well-being. The provision of individual and group counseling, peer support groups, and referral to community-based services to assist family violence, domestic violence, and dating violence victims and their dependents, recovering from the effects of the violence. The provision of services, training, technical assistance, and outreach to increase awareness of family violence, domestic violence, and dating violence, and increase accessibility to those services. The provision of culturally and linguistically appropriate services. The provision of services for children exposed to family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence, including age-appropriate counseling, supportive services, and services for the non-abusing parent that support that parent's role as a caregiver, which may, as appropriate, include services that work with the non-abusing parent and child together. The provision of advocacy, case management services, and information and referral services concerning issues related to family, domestic, or dating violence intervention and prevention, including assistance in accessing related federal and state financial assistance programs, the provision of legal advocacy to assist victims and their dependents, the provision of medical advocacy, including referrals for appropriate healthcare services, including mental health, alcohol, and drug abuse treatment, but not to include reimbursement for any healthcare services, assistance locating and securing safe and affordable permanent housing and homelessness prevention services, the provision of transportation, childcare, respite care, job training and employment services, financial literacy services and education, financial planning and related economic empowerment services, and the provision of parenting and other educational services for victims and their dependents. The provision of prevention services, including outreach to underserved populations. For those of you who have received funds for sexual assault or culturally specific services, be sure to check with your program guidance memo and your FIPSA program officer to ensure that your activities are within the range of acceptable activities. In the distribution of FIPSA grant funds, the state must ensure that not less than 70% of the funds distributed are used for the primary purpose of providing immediate shelter and supportive services to adult and youth victims of family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence and their dependents. Not less than 25% of the funds will be used for the purpose of providing supportive services and prevention services, and not more than 5% of the FIPSA grant funds may be used for state administrative costs. States, territories, and tribes that are receiving additional funds for culturally specific or sexual assault resource services should consult with your program guidance memo to ensure that you are distributing your grant funds in the appropriate manner. First, we're going to discuss some terms that are often used in the rules and regulations we'll discuss today. A pass-through entity is a non-federal entity that provides a subaward to a subrecipient to carry out part of a federal program. For example, the Culturally Specific Special Issue Resource Centers, CSSIRCs, the National Indian Resource Center, NIRC, and the Alaska Native Tribal Resource Center on Domestic Violence, ANTRCDV, are functioning as pass-through entities through the ARP Support for Survivors of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault from Culturally Specific Populations grant program. They provide funds to support culturally specific community-based organizations providing services to domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. A subaward means an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient to carry out part of a federal award received by the pass-through entity. It does not include payments to a contractor or payments to an individual that is a beneficiary of a federal program. A subaward may be provided through any form of legal agreement, including an agreement that the pass-through entity considers a contract. This may also be called a sub-grant. The grant a community-based rape crisis center receives from their state administrator through the FIPSA ARP awards to support survivors of sexual assault is an example of a subaward or a sub-grant. Now I'll pass it over to Suzanne to take us through a quick knowledge check.
Hi, thanks, Courtney. So let's apply some of this information in a couple of hypothetical scenarios that might sound familiar to you. The Intertribal Planning Agency, ITPA, is a tribal consortium of 5 tribes in the surrounding area who work together to coordinate services and outreach. ITPA received a FIPSA ARP grant to support survivors of sexual assault, which ITPA subawards to the 5 consortium member tribes to provide sexual assault services in their communities. Which of the following apply to ITPA? Are they a pass-through entity or a sub-grantee? Please put your answer in the chat. Okay, so this is an easy one. People are right on target. That is true. ITPA is indeed a pass-through entity. ITPA, it functions as, quote, an American Indian consortium, which according to the 45 CFR means any confederation of 2 or more recognized American Indian tribes created through the official resident population of 150,000 enrolled tribal members and a contiguous territory of Indian lands in 2 or more states. So in other words, the tribal consortium is an entity made up of 1 or more tribes to coordinate resources. ITPA is receiving funds through FIPSA, and they are providing grants to their member tribes who will deliver services in their communities. ITPA is not a sub-grantee, but the 5 member tribes that receive grants through ITPA are considered sub-grantees or sub-awardees. Okay, now let's take a look at this hypothetical situation, which is a poll. So hold off on your answers. I'm going to launch a poll right after I read this. So Haven Services provides emergency shelter, counseling, and advocacy services to victims of domestic violence and sexual violence in a group of rural counties in the state of excellence. They have received a grant from the State of Excellence's FIPSA administrator under the FIPSA ARP funds. Which of the following applies to Haven Services? Are they a pass-through entity, a sub-grantee? Are they a culturally specific service provider and/or service provider for underserved populations? I'm going to launch the poll, and please select all that apply. You can select multiple options.
Suzanne, I think
yeah,
the
this
wrong...
is not, yeah, sorry about that. I'm going to end this poll. Doesn't look like it's the right one. Hold on, bear with me. Stop sharing. And let's get the right one. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, hopefully all of you can see this. Thank you very much. Okay, so select all that apply to Haven Services. Okay, I appreciate everybody sharing. For the sake of time, I'm going to end the poll. Looks like people are in general consensus and share the results. So Haven Services is not receiving funds from FIPSA and is not expected to provide grants to any other organization. So they are not a pass-through entity. But Haven Services is a sub-grantee, and it looks like the majority of you agree on that. That's because Haven Services is a recipient of funds from the State of Excellence and is not expected to provide their grant funds to anybody else. Haven Services is considered a sub-grantee. Because Haven Services is a provider of services for any victim or survivor of domestic violence or sexual violence, they wouldn't be considered a culturally specific provider of services. Culturally specific services are those that are designed for a specific culturally or linguistically specific population. However, Haven Services would be considered a provider for underserved populations. This is because they serve victims and survivors in rural counties, and they are likely to be considered geographically underserved. So thanks so much for participating. I appreciate you playing along. I'm going to pass it back to Courtney, who's going to dig into how to read your notice of award.
Thank you, Suzanne. So first, we're going to look at recipient information. The recipient information is located on the left side of page 1 of your award document. Check to make sure your employee identification number, your universal entity identifier, UEI, and your project director information is correct. Note, although it says project director, what is entered in that field is the point of contact information that the Office on Grants Management receives from FIPSA, and it represents where the NOA is being emailed. Also note that the Universal Entity Identifier, UEI, is what it used to be your organization's DUNS number. If an organization does not know what their UEI is, they can check on that through sam.gov, and we'll drop that link in the chat. Next is your federal award information. The federal award information is located on the right side of page 1 of your award document. This is where you will find your award number and the CFDA number. Your award number is going to be required when and if you need technical assistance from the Office of Grants Management or your FIPSA program specialist. Your CFDA number is required for any audits you may have and many of your financial statements. Next is your financial information. Your financial information is located on page 2 under the financial information section. This lists the type of funding you have, that is, whether your funding is a formula grant, a discretionary grant, or a competitive grant, and this lists the amount of your award. Next, we'll look at the prohibition on supplanting, which is located on page 3. The prohibition on supplanting requires that an organization receiving federal funds use the money to supplement other federal, state, tribal, and local public funds. An organization that receives funding from a FIPSA ARP grant may not use that money instead of money that has already been granted by another federal entity, a state entity, or a local government entity. They are required to add to the funds that have been granted. Your funding period is located on page 3 as well. This date range tells you the period of time that a grantee has to obligate their funds. Example, if your ARP grant runs October 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2025, you are required to use your funds within that time period. Your liquidation period is also located on page 3. This date range tells you the period of time that you have to close any open accounts that remained open after the funding period. An example of this would be if you purchase a new security door for your shelter with your FIPSA ARP funds on September 16th, 2025 by credit card. Your organization has until December 30th, 2025 to ensure that your credit card bill is paid and that you've requested reimbursement from your pass-through entity for the cost of the security door. Suzanne will now walk us through a few exercises that look at the application of the elements I highlighted in the NOA.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, so Haven Services had a grant from their local government for a therapist who specializes in children who witness violence. Their local government ended that grant, and Haven Services wants to use their FIPSA ARP funding to pay for that same position. Is this supplanting? Please answer in the chat, and please share why you think this is or isn't supplanting. Okay. Right, so all of you so far, okay, this is great. So it sounds like folks are pretty much in agreement that it is not supplanting, and that is correct. This is not supplanting because the other grant is not in effect at the time that the FIPSA ARP funds will be used. And so this is not considered supplanting, and Haven Services may use the funding to pay for the therapist. Okay, so here is another poll. So hold on until excuse me, this is a chat question, I'm sorry. So the Intertribal Planning Agency that we just spoke of, ITPA, member tribe is receiving funding from the Department of Justice to support 2 domestic violence sexual assault community outreach workers. They are planning to use their FIPSA ARP grants to support survivors of sexual assault to cover one of the 2 outreach workers. Is this supplanting? Please answer in the chat as well. Okay, in this regard, everybody pretty much says yes, 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 yes. And that is correct. It is because the grants are in effect at the same time. And the Department of Justice grant has been obligated to pay for this expense that the FIPSA funds are now covering. Okay, we're going to do another knowledge check in the chat. So here, Haven Services wants to use their FIPSA ARP funding to ensure that their therapist for children who witness violence can attend a national conference that will give them additional training and expertise in trauma and how children experience trauma. Haven Services FIPSA ARP grants runs from October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2025. The conference will be held on November 15th, 2025, and they did not obligate the funds for this conference. Is this expense allowable? Please share your thoughts in the chat. Okay, no, it is not, and that is correct. No, this expense is not allowable because the cost will be incurred after the funding period of the grant ends. All expenses on a grant have to be incurred within the funding period. The activities have to happen within the funding period, and the 90-day liquidation period allows a grantee to settle any costs incurred after the funding period ends and request reimbursement from the pass-through entity or federal government. So I appreciate everybody for sharing your thoughts. And now I'll pass it back to Courtney, who will present on the requirements of pass-through entities.
Thanks, Suzanne. Let's take a look at what pass-through entities are required to do under their FIPSA grants and some general best practices. 45 CFR Part 75.352A outlines the requirements and responsibilities of pass-through entities when subgranting funds to an eligible organization. Pass-through entities shall ensure that every subaward is clearly identified to the recipient as a subaward. All terms and conditions of the award received by the pass-through entities are transferred to the subgrantee. When completing a notice of award and/or grant agreement with the subgrantee, all terms and conditions, including statutory limitations of the award, must be included on that grant agreement document. The pass-through grantee can impose their own terms and conditions on the subgrantee and list them in their notice of award and/or grant agreement with the subgrantee. These terms and conditions may include statutory and/or regulatory limitations on spending the grant award, but should also include terms and conditions that assist the pass-through entity in meeting their obligations to FIPSA. An example, if FIPSA requires that the pass-through entity to submit fiscal or programmatic reports by the 30th of the month, the pass-through entity should impose a condition on the subgrantee that they submit their fiscal and/or programmatic reports well in advance of the pass-through entity's deadline. Continuing with 45 CFR 75.352A, pass-through entities shall ensure that they are honoring either an approved federally recognized indirect cost rate negotiated between the subrecipient and the federal government, or a de minimis indirect cost rate. Pass-through entities shall ensure that the subrecipient is aware of and understands the pass-through entity's access to the subrecipient's records and financial statements as necessary for the pass-through entity to meet the requirements of audits, site visits, and regular monitoring. Another note, while the subrecipient is required to have a UEI, a Universal Entity Identifier, full SAM registration is not required for the FIPSA funds. The pass-through entity should also check the suspension and disbarment list to ensure that no one is on the list that is managing grants for your subgrantees. SAM.gov, dropped in the chat, allows you to check for these inclusions. Pass-through entities should determine when they are going to require a formal notice of a grant adjustment. Are you, as a pass-through entity, going to require a grant adjustment when there is any change in personnel, budgets, goals, or objectives, or are you going to set a threshold for your subgrantees? Pass-through entities should determine what kind of grant management system they will be using. If your pass-through entity has a grants management system into which the grantee has to report, Make sure you include that in your sub-grant agreement with the sub-grantee and ensure that training and technical assistance is provided to sub-grantees on how to use your system. Just another note, this does not have to be fancy. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet and a folder on your computer and a shared Dropbox with your sub-grantees. Pass-through entities should determine what information they are going to require from the sub-grantee over and above that which is required by HHS. Are you, as a pass-through entity, going to request more information than HHS is requesting from grantees? If so, how are you going to collect that information and by when? This additional data can be programmatic, administrative, or financial. If these additional types of data are required, how are your grantees going to find out about what information you want to collect and how you want to receive it? Pass-through entities should determine which, if any, additional terms and conditions your agency will establish for your sub-grantees. If your pass-through has decided to disallow a particular cost or expenditure that is permitted through the federal grant, please make sure this is clear. If your pass-through entity has a grants management system into which the grantee has to report, make sure, again, that you include that information in your sub-grant agreement with the sub-grantee and ensure that training and technical assistance is provided on how to use your system. And make sure that you create due dates for your sub-grantees that allow your staff enough time to calculate all of the data for all sub-grants and submit the data to the federal government. Now I'll pass it over to Suzanne, who will take us through a quick knowledge check.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. So this knowledge check is a poll that I will launch in a minute after I read through the scenario. And some of you have had a sneak peek at this when I launched it earlier by accident. So imagine you are the state of excellence and you have awarded Haven Services a sub-grant to hire a therapist who will work specifically with children who have witnessed violence. Which of the following are required to be on the sub-grant award documents that you provide to Haven Services? Please select all that apply in the poll that we're about to launch. Are people able to, I don't know, I think I might, unfortunately, I don't think we're able to do the poll since I relaunched it. So I'm going to share the results of the folks who were able to utilize it, and we can walk through the different options. So again, we're looking at what Haven Services, or which of the following are required to be on the sub-grant award documents that are provided to Haven Services. So what should be required? Well, definitely the dollar amount of the sub-award. So the folks who answered that, yes, that's correct. Any award document should include the amount of money that the sub-award is receiving in their sub-grant. All the terms and conditions for the grant that you received from ACF. So any terms and conditions that are applicable to you as a pass-through entity are also applicable to the sub-grantees, and they need to know about them in their award documents. And of course, the due dates for Haven Services financial reporting to you. So any due dates that you are imposing on the sub-grantees need to be included in those documents. Less needed are the due dates that you have to report to ACF. These might be nice to have, but they're not necessary. And having too many due dates might confuse the sub-grantees. So these same requirements also apply to award documents that the Intertribal Planning Agency would provide to their tribal sub-grantees as well. So thanks again for participating, and now I'll pass it back to Courtney.
Thanks, Suzanne. Pass-through entities are also required to submit an annual performance progress report, PPR, to FIPSA that describes the activities carried out in the previous year. Pass-through entities are also required to submit an evaluation of the effectiveness of those activities in achieving the purposes of the grant. A section of the PPR must be completed by each recipient or subrecipient that provided program services and activities during the project period. Once all of these sections are received by the pass-through entity from the subrecipients, the pass-through entities must consolidate all reports into one comprehensive report to submit to FIPSA. Pass-through entities should ensure that their deadline for receipt of the subrecipient sections are well enough in advance of the FIPSA deadline so that pass-through entity has enough time to compile and submit this report by the FIPSA deadline. A copy of the report is located at the link on the slide, and we're dropping it in the chat for your convenience. Federal financial reports, or FFRs, must be submitted electronically to the Division of Payment Management through the Payment Management System on a yearly basis at pms.psc.gov. Submit an FFR for each grant award using an SF 425, and we're dropping the link for this form in the chat as well. You can go here to confirm when your FFR is due for each FIPSA grant. You can see that link in the chat as well. Effective April 1st, 2022, HHS grant recipients are no longer required to submit quarterly cash transaction reports, also known as Federal Cash Transaction Reports, FCTRs, 30 calendar days after the end of each calendar quarter. PMS will pre-populate the cash transaction section, lines 10A through 10C of the FFR, using recipient real-time cash receipts, drawdowns, refunds, and journal vouchers, information from PMS, and adjust recipient reported disbursements to equal cash receipts on all non-closed subaccounts, PMS type P. Recipients will be required to certify at the time of each drawdown request whether the cash drawdown request is for reimbursement of actual expenditures or is in advance for immediate disbursement. At the time of each drawdown request, recipients must assert that award funds are used in compliance with all award conditions and federal statutory requirements. These changes do not impact the standard reporting requirements and deadlines for financial expenditure data submitted in the SF 425 unless otherwise noted in the notice of award. The routine drawdown of funds is critical. A good benchmark for pass-through entities is to draw down funds after collecting quarterly financial reports from your sub-grantees. Pass-through entities must ensure that the amount of funds for drawdown reflects the amount of funds spent by the sub-grantees and reflects an accurate picture of how much money has been spent and will be spent before the end of the grant period. It is the pass-through entity's responsibility to ensure that the policies of the sub-grantee are in compliance with the requirements of HHS and FIPSA. We are going to review a few of the foundational policies that pass-through entities are responsible for monitoring. The first is financial policies. Sub-grantees should maintain sufficient financial and internal controls to adequately and effectively manage the grant funds and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. Additional training on internal controls will be discussed in Module 3 of this training series. Financial policies should also include procurement policies. A sub-grantee needs to establish a procedure for a micro purchase threshold that is permitted by the state and is consistent with their internal controls. A micro purchase is a purchase under which a sub-grantee does not need to solicit competitive price or rate quotations. Procurement policies for sub-grantees should establish a process by which the sub-grantee solicits and reviews bids for any purchase over that micro purchase threshold. Minority business, women-owned businesses, and labor surplus firms should be used whenever possible. The technical specifications on procurements should be made available to the pass-through entity upon their request. Data collection and review policies are also important for pass-through entities to monitor for their sub-grantees. Pass-through entities need to ensure that sub-grantees have policies in place that allow the sub-grantee to collect data on the program and report on that data to the pass-through entity on at least a quarterly basis. Pass-through entities are also required to ensure that there are appropriate confidentiality policies in place to ensure the safety of adult, youth, and child victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and dating violence and their families. FIPSA-funded programs must establish and implement policies and protocols for maintaining the confidentiality of records pertaining to any individual provided with services. FIPSA-funded programs cannot disclose any personal identifiable information, PII, collected in connection with services, reveal PII without informed, written, and reasonably time-limited consent, or require a victim to provide a consent as a condition of eligibility for services. Additionally, consent to release PII shall be given by an unemancipated minor and the minor's parent or guardian, or in the case of an individual with a guardian, it shall be given by the individual's guardian. Sub-grantees also must have non-discrimination policies in place that prohibit discrimination or limit access on the basis of race, color, or national religion. No person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subject to discrimination under any program. 45 CFR Section 80.3. Sex and gender identity. No person shall, on the ground of actual or perceived sex, including gender identity, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity funded in whole or in part through FIPSA, 45 CFR Section 1350.5. Transgender and gender nonconforming individuals must have equal access to FIPSA-funded shelter and non-residential programs. 45 CFR Section 1350A4. Religion. An organization that participates in programs funded through FIPSA shall not, in providing services, discriminate against a program beneficiary or prospective program beneficiary on the basis of religion, a religious belief, a refusal to hold a religious belief, or a refusal to attend or participate in a religious practice. 45 CFR Section 1350.5b. Dietary practices dictated by particular religious beliefs may require reasonable accommodation in cooking or feeding arrangements for particular beneficiaries as practicable. Additionally, other forms of religious practice may require reasonable accommodation, including, but not limited to, shelters that have cleaning schedules may need to account for a survivor's religion, which prohibits that person from working on religious holidays. 45 CFR Section 1350.5b. Sexual orientation. No person shall, on the grounds of actual or perceived sexual orientation, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity funded in whole or in part through FIPSA. 45 CFR Section 1350.5c. Immigration status. FIPSA-funded services must be provided without requiring documentation of immigration status because HHS has determined that FIPSA-funded services do not fall within the definition of federal public benefit that would require verification of immigration status. 45 CFR Section 1350.5d. Communication accessibility. Grantees and sub-grantees should create a plan to ensure effective communication and equal access, including how to identify and communicate with individuals with limited English proficiency, and how to identify and properly use qualified interpretation and translation services and taglines, and how to take appropriate steps to ensure that communications with applicants, participants, beneficiaries, members of the public, and companions with disabilities are as effective as communications with others, and furnish appropriate auxiliary aids and services where necessary to afford qualified individuals with disabilities, including applicants, participants, beneficiaries, and members of the public, an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of a service program or activity. Auxiliary aids and services include qualified interpreters, large print materials, and service and assistance dogs. Again, it is the responsibility of the pass-through entity to ensure that each sub-grantee has these policies in place and that their procedures allow for these policies to be followed. Pass-through entities are also required to assess the risk of all sub-grantees at the time the award is issued. Pass-through entities should establish and/or ensure that their office includes a risk assessment policy that details the factors under consideration for determining a subrecipient's financial risk. Pass-through entities should assess the risk at the time of the subaward and should notify the subrecipient of their risk and the consequences of the risk status. Factors for consideration of assessing the risk as high, medium, or low are: does the sub-grantee have experience with same or similar awards? Has the sub-grantee had a single audit? Does the sub-grantee have new personnel or new systems to manage this grant? Who is managing the grant? And do they have experience managing these grants? Has the sub-grantee received an award from another federal agency, and have they been assessed as high risk? Has your office had difficulty with this sub-grantee in the past? Has the sub-grantee been chronically late with reports and/or submitted incomplete or incorrect reports? Being a high-risk grantee may just reflect the subawardee's newness to grants management or newness to FIPSA grants. Often, they just need additional support and information to help them build their capacity. Terms and conditions of grants may be different for differently assessed grantees. For example, high-risk grantees may be required to submit backup documentation for financial and programmatic reports and may have to have an on-site visit during each year of the grant. Low-risk grantees may not have to submit backup documentation for financial and programmatic reports and may have to receive an on-site visit only once during a multi-year grant period. Risk assessment may determine the frequency of site visit and monitoring, which we'll discuss next. Pass-through entities need to determine when and how to monitor their sub-grantees. The when. Choose when to monitor your sub-grantees. Subrecipients should be monitored at least annually and in accordance with their risk assessment. Choose how to monitor your subrecipients. Choose whether backup documentation will be submitted with reports or whether backup documentation will be maintained on site with the sub-grantee until you review it. There are several different types of monitoring and site visits. We will review a few of those quickly. The first is the desk audit. A desk audit occurs when you ask a grantee to submit all of their applicable policies, procedures, protocols, and practices to the monitoring agency so that you can assess whether they are consistent with the requirements of the federal award. Commonly audited policies and protocols include a sub-grantee's compensation and benefit policies, including executive compensation, bonus pay, hazard pay, and overtime pay. A sub-grantee's statements on non-discrimination, equity, and the accompanying policies and procedures. procurement policies, financial policies, which ensure adequate internal control, a board of directors oversight policies, whistleblower policies, data collection policies, conflict of interest policies, confidentiality policies, and financial reporting protocols. A program audit occurs when the pass-through entity monitors a grantee for compliance with the program goals and objectives. Pass-through entities may ask to see client records, protocols, and processes for how clients move through services of the agency, outreach efforts, and how those outreach efforts are documented. This may include quarterly, biannual, or annual meetings with the sub-grantee on the status of the project. This could also include reviewing or discussing outstanding balance and spend down plans with your sub-grantee. A financial audit or site visit occurs when the pass-through entity monitors a grantee for compliance with the financial policies of the grant and/or of the pass-through entity. A financial audit by the sub-grantee usually would occur in the wake of an audit of the sub-grantee, indicating that there are deficiencies in the financial systems, or after a pass-through entity receives several inaccurate, incomplete, or late financial reports from the sub-grantee, or after there is a whistleblower complaint to the pass-through entity about the sub-grantee. Financial audits will require a sub-grantee to produce backup documentation for each reimbursement request, and the grant manager from the pass-through entity to ensure that each reimbursement request matches the backup documentation. Backup documentation likely includes payroll and benefits reports, receipts for purchases, and directly billed operating costs. A financial audit or site visit could include spot checking specific expense categories, such as equipment, contractual services, travel for services, payroll, etc., or the overall claim for reimbursement at different times during the contract or award period requesting documentation. This can impact the amount of monitoring being done. For example, while conducting a financial audit, there were expenses that were not fully documented, which were then removed from the next reimbursement claim. An additional outcome might be that the sub-grantee will need to provide 100% documentation on subsequent claims going forward. The sub-grantee might need to provide full documentation because of the one instance of not having fully documented expenses. A site visit occurs when the pass-through entity physically goes to the location of the sub-grantee program and walks through the process of a client getting services, as well as visibly seeing where the grant documentation is managed. A site visit gives the grant manager the opportunity to see where the program is taking place and whether the site seems appropriate for the program. The grant manager can visualize therapy rooms, waiting areas, locations where attorneys meet with clients, etc. Note, if a site visit is virtual, allow the sub-grantee site to use pictures and videos of the site to document the where and the how of program implementation. Pro tip, if you don't have the technology to do a virtual site visit, you may be able to use grant funds to upgrade your equipment. The grant manager can review documentation on site, reports, claims with supporting documentation, any training of staff that was completed, and any kind of policies and procedures regarding the non-discrimination requirement, or the grant manager can review these policies and procedures pre or post visit. A grant manager can interview some of the grant funded staff and the supervisor or manager of the project. This helps them to determine if, what, and how services are implemented and whether or not policies and procedures are followed. For example, are staff aware of the grievance procedure or policy, or where to find a policy? If a grievance was followed, was the process followed? This all should be documented. Did the staff have civil rights training or training on any of the sub-grantees' non-discrimination procedures? A grant manager may want to consider sending out an agenda or a schedule which outlines the purpose of the monitoring, the type of the monitoring, the date and time of the monitoring, what staff needs to be available and included for the monitoring, what documents, policies, etc. need to be available for review, where monitoring will occur. Will it occur in a private space, an office location? Will you visit multiple locations? And another pro tip is that the grant manager will definitely want to include the potential outcomes of the monitoring. Will there be a verbal summary at the end of the meeting? Will there be a written report or letter with the outcome mailed or emailed to the sub-grantee? Who will be notified of the outcome of the visit? Will that be the program director, the executive director, the board chair, etc.? If there is any corrective action, what does that mean? The grant manager should let the sub-grantee know that in advance. Is there a deadline for adjusting or completing corrective actions? What are these expectations? If a sub-grantee is put on probation, outline what this means and the expectations of probation. Pass-through entities should be prepared to monitor sub-grantees for financial compliance on a monthly and quarterly basis. In addition to audits, grant managers should be prepared to monitor their sub-grantees for financial compliance with the grant on a monthly or quarterly basis. That is, whenever the sub-grantee is requesting reimbursement. Is the grantee spending money in a way that makes sense according to their grant? Is the sub-grantee requesting reimbursement for an expenditure that is not allowed and/or not in the sub-grantee's grant budget? If the sub-grantee is high risk, you may want to request backup financial documentation at each reimbursement request. If you do that, go through the backup documentation to make sure that the request matches the documentation that the sub-grantee has provided. If you are allowing advances for certain grantees, you want to carefully track the amount of money spent by this grantee before you authorize another advance or a request for reimbursement. Pass-through entities should also follow up on all deficiencies when they are identified. When a deficiency is identified, follow up with the sub-grantee in a set period of time to check that the deficiency is resolved. This is often 4 to 6 weeks after the site visit. If the deficiency isn't resolved in a set period of time, the pass-through entity should issue some type of warning or sanction. Ensure that the pass-through entity has a policy on what happens if the sub-grantee is persistently non-compliant. Is the sub-grantee aware of the possibility of sanctions or probations prior or right after accepting the grant award? Is this information available to them, posted on the website, part of a sub-grantee manual, provided as certified assurances on their grant agreement, provided at an orientation, etc.? This isn't only for audit deficiencies, but violations or outcomes as it relates to any grant requirement. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. This is just a reminder that slides and this presentation will be available to you. Now I'll pass it back over to Suzanne to help us apply this to real-world examples.
Thank you, Courtney. And while we're doing reminders, I also want to let folks know to please put your questions in the chat. And if we can't get to them, we will be providing a follow-up FAQ. And if we don't answer your question directly, we will be consolidating questions under themes to make sure that we're answering your questions. So here is a knowledge check. Imagine that you are the state of excellence. So this is the pass-through entity, and you have requested that a sub-grantee provide all of their compensation and benefits policies to you for review. What type of monitoring is this? Please answer in the chat. And your options are, is this a site visit? Is this a program audit? Is this a financial audit? Or is it a desk audit? Okay, looks like people are in agreement that this is a desk audit. Thank you for your response. This is indeed a desk audit. A desk audit happens when the grant manager asks to see a set of program policies and procedures to ensure that they are in compliance with the federal requirements. This may also ensure that the program's policies and procedures are in compliance with your policies, provided that your state policies do not conflict with federal requirements. Okay, so this is a poll that I'll be launching momentarily. Now imagine that you are with the Intertribal Planning Agency, ITPA, and you have requested that one of the member tribes, a sub-grantee, make themselves available for a site visit. Which of the following is best practice to do in advance of the site visit? I'm going to launch the poll. Please select all that apply. Are you going to review all of their policies and procedures, schedule appointments with grant-funded staff, develop an agenda, and outline expectations for the site visit and how the outcomes will be communicated? Which of these are appropriate and best practice in advance of conducting a site visit? I'll let folks enter. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in a couple seconds. All right. Okay. So the first, it looks like about 68% of you believe that reviewing all of their policies and procedures in advance of a site visit is best practice. Reviewing all of these policies and procedures isn't usually necessary for a site visit unless you're at the site to audit something in particular. 75% of you say that you should schedule appointments with grant-funded staff, and that is definitely an example of best practice. 86% of you said to develop an agenda, and that is a best practice as well. And 96% of you selected to outline expectations for the site visit and how the outcomes will be communicated. And that too is a best practice for conducting site visits. So thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it back to Courtney, who will now take us through the requirements of sub-grantees under the FIPSA grants, as well as share more best practices.
Thank you, Suzanne. I hope everyone had a little bit of a break there with the knowledge checks. We're moving from pass-through entities to sub-grantees now. Sub-grantee organizations should read all terms and conditions of their awards as soon as they are received to ensure that you understand them and that you can meet them. Can you realistically meet the terms and conditions? We just talked through some of the terms and conditions that pass-through entities are required to monitor of sub-grantees. Ask yourself, can you realistically meet the terms and conditions? Is your organization prepared to implement the data collection, confidentiality, and anti-discrimination policies? Keep in mind that a pass-through entity may establish terms and conditions that are additional. Are you prepared to meet the terms and conditions that are in addition to the federal award? Sub-grantee organizations should establish policies and procedures to ensure adequate communication between the intra-agency program staff and the fiscal staff. Do your program managers know what their budgets are and have control over their grant budgets? How do your program managers access materials and supplies for their programs? What are the procurement policies of your agency? Do your program managers know what those procurement policies are? And are there acceptable internal controls in your agency to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse? A sub-grantee has the duty to inform the pass-through entity if the sub-grantee is forecasting difficulty in meeting the goals and objectives of the grant, the sub-grantee has a significant change of staff and/or is having difficulty hiring staff, the sub-grantee has discovered project-related or financial-related misconduct on the part of their staff or their board, the sub-grantee wants to reallocate their budget or their staff. Duty to inform is always present, but there is a formal duty to inform at a point established by the pass-through entity. As a pass-through entity, make sure you explain this to the sub-grantee and include how to notify. That might be by email or a phone call, documented in a grants management system, or as part of quarterly or monthly monitoring, or you might have a specific form or questions added to performance reports. As sub-grantees, sometimes we're really nervous to talk to our program officer or our grant manager about something that has gone wrong. Trust me, it is much better to hear that from you than to find it out in an audit. Sub-grantee organizations must make records accessible to the pass-through entity upon request. This does not include the true name of crime victims unless the circumstance is extraordinary and rare. Reminder, in claim reimbursement, if you are providing client assistance, never paid directly to the victim, but paid to another agency or vendor, a landlord, for example, that sub-grantee should have documentation with the client name or ID on paperwork, but the name and other identifying information should be redacted from all claims and not shared with the state, territory, or tribal agency awarding the funds. These records must be accessible to the pass-through entity as long as records of the sub-grantee are retained. All sub-grantees should establish a records retention policy that meets the minimum of the federal requirement and the licensure requirement of any professionals working with the client. Be mindful that professions like social work, medical nurses, and attorneys are going to have requirements of their own. Sub-grantee organizations must establish a policy for records retention that meets or exceeds the federal standards. 3 years from the date that the last report was submitted, or until any and all litigation that began before the 3-year period is routine. Oftentimes, the last report is actually the audit for that same time period. Everything that is completed with money from your grant has to be documented, whether the money purchased an item that is used in service, or is paying for staff time to train community, or is doing direct victim services. It has to be documented. The sub-grantee should develop a process to document the work that is being completed with grant funds, as well as any data points and variables that are required by the pass-through and federal funding entity. This might include the number of unique clients served, the type of service that clients received, the number of times that the client received service, any demographic information that was requested by the pass-through entity, and the type of primary victimization of the client. This might be domestic violence, dating violence, child sexual abuse, teen sexual assault, adults molested as children, etc. This is a big one. Time and effort documentation. Timesheets require a staff member's name and the time that the staff member actually spent on the grant. What to include in time and effort documentation. Time and effort documentation needs to include the name of the employee, the signature of a staff member, electronic signatures are acceptable, the date of the work and the services performed, the time allocated by each funding source for each day, description of the services, and review and signature of the supervisor or the manager of that staff person. Again, electronic signatures are acceptable. Administrating or pass-through agencies would check time and effort documentation and reports during monitoring visits to compare them to reimbursement requests. Your administering or pass-through agency will also check to make sure that there is a process for conducting time and effort documentation. Remember, timesheets are required to be signed by the employee and their manager, and they have to reflect the actual time worked. Sub-grantees with multiple streams of funding must develop a method to ensure that the money received from different sources is accounted for separately. If an organization does not have a grants manager that specifically handles this workload, the sub-grantee should ensure that the work is divided in such a way that the sub-grantee organization can accurately account for their funds and their programmatic outputs according to the grant funding stream. Please be sure to ask yourself whether there is a safety net in place to ensure these deadlines are met and that the financials are monitored accurately. Here's another pro tip. Awards that are received by FIPSA formula subgrants and awards that are received through ARP funds need to be managed separately and reported upon separately. This includes programmatic reporting as well as financial reporting. This also includes ensuring that an employee's timesheets separate whether they are working for the core funding or whether they are working under ARP funds. Two, know that the material, good, or service is allowed as an expenditure by that particular grant. Know that there is money available in the approved budget for that particular material, good, or service. Ensure that all procurement practices are met before purchasing the material, good, or service. And ensure that the receipt is provided immediately to the sub-grantee's grant manager, who will charge that cost to the grant to be reimbursed. Staff who are allocated to different grant sources have to be sure to allocate their time in the same proportion as their time on the grant states, or there has to be a grant adjustment. An example of this is if a clinician is allocated 50% to FIPSA funding and 50% to VOCA funding, 20 hours of that clinician's time reflected on the clinician's timesheet has to reflect that the clinician is doing work for the FIPSA grant and what they are doing for the FIPSA grant. The other 20 hours has to reflect that the clinician is working on the VOCA grant. This clinician is not permitted to do any work in the organization that is not explicitly permitted by FIPSA or VOCA. I'm going to pass it to Suzanne for a very quick knowledge check.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, so this is a true or false answer in the chat. So Haven House receives multiple FIPSA grants through the State of Excellence, which is a reminder that's their FIPSA state administrator, including core FIPSA funding, as well as ARP sexual assault funding. Given that their domestic violence sexual assault outreach worker is 100% FIPSA funded through a combination of both these two FIPSA grants, they don't need to require their outreach worker to track her actual time worked in the same proportion as the hours are approved in each of the FIPSA grants. Is this true or false? Okay. Looks like everybody who's answered so far agrees that this is false. And it is kind of tricky because it's all FIPSA funding. However, these are very separate, distinct grants, and they must be tracked separately. Thank you all for not only playing this game with me, but staying with us, because I know this is a lot of information. It's a lot to process. This will not be the last time you see this information. And as Courtney said earlier, this is just the beginning of the discussion, and we are here to answer your questions as they come up as you move forward in your work. So now I'm going to pass it back to Courtney.
Thank you, Suzanne. Advances. I saw in the chat in the beginning that folks were interested in advances. Sub-grantee organizations for whom the FIPSA award is a large percentage of their budget, or sub-grantee organizations that are small, may require an advance on their grant award to maintain operations. Advances may or may not be permitted by the pass-through entity and will likely only be available if the sub-grantee's risk assessment is such that the pass-through entity can confidently advance funding, knowing that the sub-grantee will perform the services and report on the services performed consistent with the terms and conditions of the grant. While advances may seem like the preferred method, there is greater pressure on the sub-grantee to closely manage advanced funds and return any unspent funds to the pass-through grantee if the funds are not fully expended at the conclusion of the grant period. In addition, and this is important, pass-through entities who allow advances need to advance the funds through their own financial reserves. Federal drawdowns are for reimbursement purposes only and may not be used for advances. Reimbursement is the far more common method of receiving funds from the pass-through entity. Sub-grantees should work closely with their pass-through entity grant manager to ensure that the sub-grantee is submitting requests for reimbursement as quickly as possible so that the reimbursement is able to occur more quickly. Note, it is within the purview of the pass-through entity to require that sub-grantees submit their programmatic reports before receiving any reimbursements. Be sure that you are able to turn data around quickly to avoid any unnecessary delays in receiving your money. There may be a hold on reimbursement until programmatic reports are submitted. Site visits and audits are the responsibility of the pass-through entity, not the sub-grantee. However, sub-grantees can make the process easy with preparation and communication. Sub-grantees can confirm with their grant manager or their auditor the purpose of the site visit or audit. Is the purpose programmatic? Is it financial? Will this be a desk audit? Are they going to be coming to your office, or will the site visit or audit be conducted virtually? Confirm with your grant manager the time and length of the audit and the staff that they want available and for how long. I would say that the more narrow the time frames, the less this is going to disrupt your operations. So you want to confirm that with your grant manager. You may want to consider whether you want a board member present. A programmatic audit or an on-site visit may require programmatic staff to be available as well. Find out from the grant manager how long and when you will need that programmatic staff so as to mitigate the impact on client services. If the audit is going to be on-site, sub-grantees can request that the pass-through grant manager sign an agreement to not disclose any PII of the clients that they see while conducting the site visit, and to not disclose the location of a confidential service space. Sub-grantees should gather all materials relevant to the audit before the audit takes place. Depending on the scope of the audit, this may include redacted client files, receipts, payroll reports, policies and procedures, documentation of procurement processes, documentation of other services provided, policies and procedures on non-discrimination, etc. And sub-grantees can reserve a private space for the grant manager to meet with staff and/or review documents. Finally, we're on to audits, the last section of our training today. Sub-grantees who receive over $750,000 in federal funds per year are required to do an annual single source audit. The federal threshold is $750,000. If all of that $750,000 comes from one source of federal funding, the sub-grantee can do a program-specific audit instead. Please consult with your grant manager to make sure you know what kind of audit you need. Pass-through entities can mandate any type of audit requirement that they want, provided that every sub-grantee who receives over $750,000 in federal funds in 1 year receives a single source audit. For example, a pass-through entity can require that a sub-grantee have a single source audit if they receive $500,000 in federal funds, and/or that the sub-grantee has to have an audit every year. If the pass-through entity requires an audit, the pass-through entity should require that the audit be submitted to them for review. And the pass-through entity should review any audit that they've required for material deficiencies that were identified by the auditor. Sub-grantees are required to have an audit consistent with the policies and protocols established by the pass-through entity and consistent with the policies and protocols established by the sub-grantee organization. Sub-grantees should schedule the audit within 3 months of the close of the sub-grantee's fiscal year and have the audit submitted to the pass-through entity within 6 months of the fiscal year ending. Sub-grantees should choose their auditor in accordance with the sub-grantee's procurement policy. It is best practice to change your auditor every 3 to 5 years. Whew, that was a lot, but audits are over. Now I'll pass it over to Laura to share all the grants management resources and support that is available to you.
All right, thank you, Courtney. We do not want to leave you empty-handed after training today. This was a significant amount of information to process. We will share the recording of this training in English and Spanish as soon as we can, and we encourage you to share it with colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. We have several documents that we will share in the chat that will be helpful for you as you manage your ARP funds. We will also send the links to these documents in our post-training communication. FIPSA launched a comprehensive online resource for all FIPSA ARP grantees. And you can see there's a screenshot of the brand new portal. And we highly encourage you to take a look at it and see all of the resources. The website includes a ton of resources, including FAQs, new initiatives features, all FIPSA ARP, program instruction memos, success stories, podcasts, and other resources to help states, tribes, territories, coalitions, resource centers, and hotlines provide services to support survivors and their children. This website also includes information about these financial grants management trainings. There's a link to register for the Module 3, which will be on internal controls at the end of June. So you can get registered for our next training. You can find the recording slides and all the supporting materials for each training in Spanish and English, including the FAQ for Module 1. If you weren't able to join us for Module 1, the recording is already up on the website, and we hope you get to take a look at it. All right, some additional resources. You can find all the links to the FIPSA ARP program guidance memos on the new FIPSA ARP grants portal. And we're also posting lots of links and information in the chat right now. Some additional grants management resources that are also being placed into the chat. You can find the HHS grants policy and regulations. Where you can locate reporting forms and the link to the FIPSA final rule, which includes all FIPSA requirements and definitions mentioned in this training. I'm also sharing a very helpful grants management toolkit for tribal grantees from the Administration for Native Americans. That is a wonderful toolkit. Please take a look at that document. All of these links will, again, be provided in post-training material we'll be sending out shortly. We mentioned the payment management system earlier in the training. These are the resources for drawing down your funds. You will hear us talk a lot about the importance of obligating and drawing down your funds throughout this training series. You are doing so much important work, and you know firsthand how important this funding is to the survivors and the organizations you serve. Your FPO and grants management officer are here to support you in navigating any barriers that prevent you from drawing down your funds in a timely manner. The payment management systems offers a range of training and resources to help you with the process of drawing down funds and submitting your federal financial report. Our next training will be at the end of June, on June 29th. It will be our internal controls training, and you can see all of the learning objectives where you'll have an opportunity to define the purpose and key elements of internal controls as defined by the 2 federally approved internal control frameworks, define the role management program and financial staff play in establishing and maintaining effective internal controls, and discuss how internal controls are used to achieve operations, reporting, and compliance objectives. And finally, identify resources to help administering agencies and sub-grantees to design, implement, and operate effective internal control systems. So that training is scheduled for June 29th. If you go to the FIPSA ARP portal under training and technical assistance, you can register now for that training. We would love to have you join us for the 3rd and final training module. We also just posted in the chat our post-training survey. So we would love to hear feedback from you about how the training went. Was it helpful for you? And be able to use that information for upcoming training and technical assistance. I believe the time for the training on the 29th is 2 o'clock, from 2 to 4, East Coast time. Okay, and then please take note of your FIPSA program officers and see that you have a separate FPO for your ARP sexual assault grant. You have a separate program specialist who will be helping with the sexual assault grant. They are here to support you, and I encourage you to reach out and build a relationship with them if you haven't already. Relationships are essential for FPOs to understanding your successes and challenges. And for grantees, it is more stressful to relate a crisis or immediate concern to a stranger than to share it with someone with whom you have an established relationship with. So you can see we're going back and forth between the 2 slides where you see regions 1 through 5, and then you'll see regions 6 through 10, just in case. Please take a moment to fill out the post-training survey for us that we popped into the chat. That's really helpful for us. We're so grateful for your participation today. Thank you so much for joining us. To that end, please fill out the post-training survey. I'm going to say it over and over again because we need as much data as possible. We'd like to thank Director Shondell Dawson with FIPSA and the FIPSA program officers for all of their help in developing this training, and Director Janice Caldwell with the Office of Grants Management and the OGM staff for their expertise and support as well. We also engage subject matter experts for their insights in the development of this training, including Tor Parker and Jackie Old Coyote for their tribal grantee perspectives. I also want to thank the Spanish and the ASL interpreters for making our webinar accessible today, and to our very helpful ACF Zoom tech support staff. Thank you all so much for participating, and be on the lookout for lots of follow-up information and emails, and take a look at our new website because that's where all of this information will ultimately be housed for you to access. Have a good afternoon.